Exposed power lines keep causing fires and keep not getting buried underground because it's expensive. I've heard people say, do you want to pay more taxes to fund this? No. I want you to use the exorbitant taxes you already collect to prioritize it. California is the place that spends money and gets nothing, which is why you may have noticed when the fires broke out, no one escaped by high-speed rail. Am I against a lesbian being chief? Of course not. Do I think a lesbian can do the job? Of course I do. And maybe she's the best person for the job. Or maybe they really wanted a lesbian in that job, and she's just the best lesbian for the job. And with essential services, that's not good enough.
In California, the political scene often feels like a constant performance filled with illusions and half-truths. Choosing to launch a full-scale attack on live television against Gavin Newsom and the broader Democratic leadership was like striking a spark in a room already lined with fireworks. True to his fearless reputation, Maher is taking direct aim at what he sees as the state's failings, ranging from reckless spending to weak governance and a complete lack of accountability.
At least in the Palisades, the hydrants were still there. 300 other ones around the city are just gone, stolen for parts. One of the 3 reservoirs for the Palisades was offline at the one time of year when it was most needed. LA's Mayor Karen Bass, the Nero of American politics, was fiddling in Ghana while the city burned and later placed the blame on 8 months of negligible rain and winds that have not been seen in LA in at least 14 years. Yeah, that's not that long a time. Maybe look in the history books to see how our ancestors handled it back in 2 and 1.
The controversy isn't just making headlines, it's fueling countless conversations. California may be celebrated for its sunshine, ambition, and larger-than-life dreams, yet the state still struggles with the same frustrating problems. From unreliable fire systems to aging power lines that spark more anxiety than safety, residents are left asking the same question. Why do these issues never seem to go away?
When asked why so many of the hydrants in the Palisades ran out of water, Governor Newsom said the local folks are trying to figure that out. Yeah, you got to do that before the fire.
Maher is pointing fingers at the fire prevention strategies that are more like fairy.
Maher argues that California's fire safety measures sound more like wishful stories than real protection, pointing to a history of failures that speaks for itself.
The mayor said about cuts to the fire department's budget, there were no reductions that were made that would have impacted the situation. The fire chief here had a slightly different take. She said, "We are screaming to be properly funded. And yes, the budget was cut and it did impact our ability to provide service. And by the looks of all the fire engines in the boneyard out of service because we didn't fix them."
Even with all this turmoil, California's leaders still seem stuck in identity politics, as though clinging to an outdated playbook. Whether you share Maher's outrage at these blunders or you're simply watching the fiery drama unfold, you've landed in the right place. Be sure to hit subscribe if you want to stay tuned for sharp analysis and unfiltered truth. It's the best way to keep up with this whirlwind of political theater, and it keeps this conversation alive. I'm glad you're here. Together we can make sense of this roller coaster. At the heart of it all is Bill Maher's biting criticism, which cuts deeper than Gavin Newsom's leadership alone. He broadens the scope, sometimes too broadly, by targeting the entire Democratic Party. His stance? A no-nonsense indictment of California's political class, exposing what he sees as repeated failures in governance. To him, Democrats have turned the Golden State into a ticking time bomb of unresolved crises. And in Maher's view, much of the praise for Governor Newsom's charm and charisma masks a troubling lack of substance beneath the showmanship.
The good news is our fire chief is a lesbian. Am I against a lesbian being chief? Of course not. Do I think a lesbian can do the job? Of course I do. And maybe she's the best person for the job. Or maybe they really wanted a lesbian in that job, and she's just the best lesbian for the job. And with essential services, that's not...
And that's where things get especially troubling, because these shortcomings aren't just political games, they affect essential services. Maher's central claim is that California's leadership has let its people down, offering mixed signals that create more chaos than clarity, more empty talk than real results. Picture living in one of the most heavily taxed states in the nation, only to see vital infrastructure neglected time and time again.
We have the highest marginal tax rate in America, higher than almost all other states, and soon Greenland. What is included for that? Breadsticks? Because it clearly doesn't cover fire. That's government's job. Protect us. from crime, violence, theft, fire. I'm not saying Alabama would have done better with fires by fighting them with prayer in school. But look me in the eye and tell me anyone could have done worse. We just got our ass kicked by fire, something Neanderthals fought.
Pouring billions into state coffers seems to fuel nothing more than a cycle of clumsy bureaucracy. Maher zeroes in on the wildfire crisis, noting that while devastating blazes strike California year after year, the state's prevention strategies remain woefully unprepared for the scale of the disaster.
The power lines that cut through Topanga weren't upgraded because it endangered an herb, the milk vetch, which sounds like something they serve at Passover. I mean, talk about not seeing the forest for the trees. You know what the absolute worst thing for the environment is? Wildfires. A 22 study found that the smoke from just the two in 2020 wiped out 18 years of carbon reduction in the state, which means we suffered the pain of driving those early model Priuses for nothing.
California's high-speed rail project, once hailed as a groundbreaking step in public transit, is now bogged down by mismanagement and broken promises. At the same time, outdated power lines continue to spark fire hazards, and the homelessness crisis has spiraled into a full-blown catastrophe. Maher doesn't hold back in condemning these failures, arguing that under the current administration, the problems are only deepening. The frustration is easy to understand. California is among the richest states in the nation, yet the gap between resources and their effective use is impossible to ignore. But Maher's criticism doesn't stop at structural breakdowns. He shifts focus to what he sees as flaws in the Democratic Party's leadership style, and that's where his commentary sharpens. In his view, the administration is too preoccupied with polishing its image through inclusivity and diversity campaigns rather than prioritizing competence and results. He even goes so far as to suggest that merit is being sidelined in favor of political correctness, raising the question of whether symbolism is replacing substance in California's governance. Maher doesn't pull any punches, insisting that California's challenges are compounded by a lack of accountability. His commentary zeroes in on identity politics, a subject he approaches with blunt force. In his view, when representation is prioritized over competence, the real goals get lost in the noise. He makes clear that he isn't against diversity or inclusivity, but he argues that results should never take a backseat to symbolic gestures. One of his harshest criticisms targets California's environmental policies. He points to cases where essential infrastructure upgrades were delayed out of concern for a single plant species, an example he sees as proof that the state's priorities are skewed. To Maher, this is California's common sense being sacrificed in the name of extreme environmentalism. For him, the bigger issue is the pattern, relying on symbolic moves rather than pursuing practical, lasting solutions.
California is the place that spends money and gets nothing, which is why you may have noticed when the fires broke out, no one escaped by high-speed rail.
It feels as though California is building a house of cards on shaky ground, and it's no wonder residents are frustrated. They simply want leaders who can deliver on their promises. When wildfires rage unchecked, posting slogans or curated photos online does little to comfort those living through the chaos. Maher's remarks are deliberately provocative, yes, but they also tap into a genuine frustration that many Californians share.
Exposed power lines keep causing fires and keep not getting buried underground because it's expensive. I've heard people say, do you want to pay more taxes to fund this? No. I want you to use the exorbitant taxes you already collect to prioritize.
California's troubles don't end at its borders. Poor management in a state this influential often spills into national challenges. Maher argues that Governor Gavin Newsom's responses to crises resemble staged performances more than genuine solutions. It's like watching a Broadway production where everyone is costumed, but no one knows their lines or how the show should end. And the audience, meaning the voters, is visibly losing patience. Maher often points to examples like the state's emergency water plan, mocking it as little more than hoping for the best. To him, this mindset reflects a fantasy world where wishful thinking is mistaken for actual policy. Behind the curtain, he says, the reality is stark. A mismanaged state budget and public funds evaporating faster than ice cream on a hot day. Over and over, he hammers at the same point. California prioritizes appearances over results. It's not hard to see why his blunt assessments strike a chord with so many. People are tired of being fed polished speeches while living with crumbling infrastructure, wildfires, and broken systems. And while California is at the center of this storm, the debate is far bigger. It highlights urgent questions about leadership, accountability, and the direction politics is taking nationwide. To Maher, Newsom embodies the polished image of modern politics, but the real issue lies beneath that glossy exterior. After years of leadership, should Californians expect more than polished speeches and endless promises? Maher insists they should, and his focus on tangible results may be the clearest takeaway from his critique. With every point he raises, he highlights not just what hasn't been done, but what could have been achieved if priorities were different. His message is a call for practical, results-driven leadership that delivers real improvements people can actually see in their lifetimes. For Maher, the spectacle has gone on long enough. His criticism isn't just about assigning blame, it's about shaking the system and asking how much worse things must get before accountability and real progress take hold. California's government, he argues, is under pressure to plan smarter, act decisively, and never lose sight of its true mission, serving the people. So now the question turns to you. With these failures and criticisms out in the open, what's your perspective? Do you believe California is being managed effectively, or do you share Maher's frustrations? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep this conversation moving.